Matthew has been successful in Travel Photographer of the Year on a number of occasions, both with still images and with video. And his most recent success was with the short film video last year. So I'm simply going to hand over to him now and say, Matthew, thank you very much for joining us today. And we're looking forward to this.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, as Kath said, very happy to take questions throughout. So do feel free to put those in the chat. Very happy for this to be as interactive as people would like it to be. But equally, we can, go over questions at the end as well. The plan for the talk this afternoon is I'm gonna creating an impact with wildlife photography. And when I'm talking about creating an impact, it's sort of twofold. It's creating an impact. How do you take images that are striking images that create an impact to the viewer? But there is also a bit of a section on creating an impact in terms of conservation. So actually making a difference through photography and filmmaking. So I've sort of got essentially the talk is sort of got three sections. I think there's three things that ultimately make an image unique or can make an image interesting. And I've split the talk up sort of roughly into those sections. So you've got storytelling, moments, and behavior. That's sort of one category. That is something in itself that can make an image interesting. The second one of the three things is light. So I've got a section where I'll show you a few images using interesting and different types of light and talk a little bit about that. And then compositions and bringing in that sense of place. So that's the third of the three. And I think that sort of sense of place is something that talking to Kath and John is a big part of what you talk about as a travel group. Always trying to bring in that sense of place, which I think, whether you're doing travel photography or wildlife photography, it's sort of very similar in a way. You're trying to create atmosphere and give a sense of place. So I've got a bit of a section on that as well. I will also show you, so we'll have a sort of first section. We'll then have a short break to give you a chance to go and maybe make a cup of tea or coffee. And I'll then show you the 10-minute film Caribbean Yumbani after the break, a little bit more, and then we can have some more questions as well. So, without further ado, so just to let you know a little bit about myself before I get into all of the tips. I've been a professional photographer and filmmaker for just over 10 years now. I qualified as an accountant, went through 3 years of hellish exams, and the day I qualified, I quit and walked out of the door as a photographer. At the start, it was very much actually a lot of travel photography with some wildlife on the side. And over the years, I've sort of evolved more into doing a lot of wildlife photography. So do a mixture of things, run workshops and photography holidays, sell prints, do talks like this, do commissions. So it's sort of a nice mixture of work that I do. I wanted to start actually by sharing a few travel images with you to sort of show you where I came from and then evolve into the wildlife photography. And the reason I want to sort of do this is that throughout all photography, to me, as a photographer, you are a storyteller. And it doesn't matter whether you are, this is a lady in a market in Madagascar. We've got a lady slash and burn in Indonesia. Landscapes, it's a similar sort of thing. You're trying to tell a story of the location that you're in. This is El Chalten in Patagonia, slightly closer to home, up in Scotland. And I've also done sort of a lot of commercial work. This was canoed across Scotland from the west coast to the east coast. If anyone's looking for a bit of adventure, it's a really amazing trip, that sort of canoeing trip. This was for a company called Secret Adventures. And this was a shoot, a kayak race. It was very staged, but a kayak race along the Thames for Talisker whiskey. And I think throughout all photography, whether it is travel, commercial, or anything, what you're ultimately trying to do is convey a story to someone. You are trying to share a story and give someone an insight into something. I will come back to these images in a moment. I think in general, sometimes with photography, the focus is very much on creating single images. And, to a certain extent, that is what photography is about. It is, yes, about, creating that one amazing photograph that you want to put up on the wall. But I think thinking about photography as storytelling, as series of images, is actually not necessarily better, but it's how I personally like to think about photography, as series of images. I'll come back to these photos in a moment. So, as I said, the talk sort of got these three sections. We're going to talk a bit about storytelling, moments and behavior, interactions. The second one, we're going to talk a bit about light. And thirdly, a little bit about composition and bringing in that sense of place. And I think any one of those three things that I just mentioned are enough to make a photograph unique. Because I think ultimately that's the aim. You want to capture images that are unique, that someone else can't just instantly go out and replicate. You want someone to look at a photo and feel like they're experiencing a moment in time, not something that is just sort of stood still and sat there forever. And I think focusing on sort of storytelling, interactions, moments, well, those are unique. Light is also inherently unique. The idea that someone's going to go to that same place, find the same subject in the same light, maybe to a certain extent, but not really. And certainly compositions, when you start bringing in the landscape, that also helps in creating unique images that are hard to replicate, essentially. And I think that's a really important part in photography, is creating something someone else can't instantly replicate, because also to the viewer it then shows this moment in time. So I think these three things that I mentioned are sort of how you go from the two images on the left, which I remember being incredibly happy with probably about 15 years ago, as I was sort of getting into photography, and I remember thinking that they were the most fantastic photos, but I sort of look at them now and they're fine, but really there's nothing unique about them. Those shots on the left, they're a bit sort of one-dimensional. So I think thinking about the storytelling, light and composition is how you go from those two images on the left to those two images on the right. Apologies for the voice. I have a bit of a cold, but hopefully you can all hear me okay. I remember going to so this is the first sort of section on storytelling, moments and behavior. I remember going to a travel photographer of the year. They used to do sort of travel photography weekends. Again, probably, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, something like that. And a photographer called Philip Lee Harvey. A lot of you may well know his name because he's very famous sort of in the travel photography world. Absolutely incredible photographer. He gave a brilliant talk. And I think this must have been about 12 years ago. So it was a couple of years before I decided to quit my job and actually do photography. And I remember him saying, you'll never get anywhere presenting single images. Photography is about producing a series of photographs. And that just really stuck with me at the time. And it's something that I've sort of tried to take into my own work, because I think it's so true. I think, yes, those single images have a time and a place, but producing a series can show so much more insight into your subject than just a single image. And to sort of illustrate this point, this is a photo of a couple of sort of 1-year-old cheetahs in Mara North Conservancy. If I just sort of present the image and I give you no context, you might look at it, hopefully you're looking at it and thinking, oh, that's a really lovely photograph. But there's very sort of little insight that goes with it if I just let you sort of sit and look at it. Thinking of photography as storytelling, um, I think goes beyond just simply presenting images. Storytelling goes to or speaks to how you select a group of images. It talks to how you decide to title your images. It talks to it's important to also think about the captions that go, the story that goes alongside the photographs that you're showing people. Why should people be interested in these images? Or what are they sort of showing you? And this series here, for example, these are from an exhibition I had in summer of 2013. I went out to Mara North Conservancy, which I'll talk a little bit more about later in the talk. Went out to Mara North Conservancy in Kenya for a month with the aim of basically putting together an exhibition. And day in, day out over that month, I would go and see the same individuals. So in these photographs here, you've got a cheetah called Quayle, and she had three roughly sort of 1-year-old cubs. And that's about the time in a cheetah's life when the cubs will sort of be they're getting towards the stage where they're going to be leaving their mother and going off by themselves. And she's starting to try and get them involved in the hunting and sort of so that they're ready to go out by themselves and survive. And these images here, I saw her probably every other day while I was out there. At one point, I spent literally 2.5 days with her because what I realized that was going on in her life at that time was that she was teaching her cubs to hunt. So that was what sort of to me was the story of Quayle at that time. And I really wanted to capture an image of Quayle hunting. So I was with her for 2.5 days straight. There was a couple of there was quite a few chases, nothing actually successful. On the third day, I forgot to take lunch out with me and decided to go back to the lodge to have lunch at the lodge. And then I was going to go out again in the afternoon. And about half an hour after I got back, some guests arrived at the lodge. And I was like, oh, welcome. How was your drive from the airport? They're like, oh, it's amazing. We just saw this cheetah make a kill. And yeah, so having sat with her for two and a half days, the moment I left, she went and made a kill. But yeah, these images sort of summarize this point in her life. In the top left, erudition. Erudition means the quality of having or showing great knowledge or learning. And I think that thinking about the sort of titles, the story, you can see in that top left image, Quayle is heading off to hunt, and that's one of her cubs watching on as she heads off. Education, the bottom image in the middle, that's her cubs watching as she went off to try and find some prey. And yeah, this sort of captured that moment in time. So thousands of images, but picking these five sort of, I felt like they captured what was happening at that point in time. So I think, when you think about a lot of competitions, photography competitions, the RPS as well, it's you don't just always submit single images. It's about these series. I'd like to sort of play this game a bit again. If I show you these images here with absolutely no context, hopefully again you're looking at them and thinking these are some nice moments between some lions. Lions often greet each other. Like on the left, they'll rub heads when they meet each other. But the image on the right in particular, sort of quite a tender moment between a cub and one of the adolescent males in the pride. If you sort of leave them as standalone images without any context, hopefully there is some feeling there. But then to sort of give the story behind it. So the Marsh Pride I saw literally every day I was there, the month I was there in 2022. And it was fascinating just sort of watching them over the month and seeing how their story evolved. And this was the Marsh Pride, and they were sort of coming to blows with another pride, a sort of neighbouring pride, the Sarian Pride. And there was one day when I went out to try and find them, and a few of the lionesses had scars, and one of the cubs had unfortunately died and vanished. Whether that was the neighbouring pride or hyenas, I'm not entirely sure, or buffalo perhaps. But these in those couple of days after the pride went through this sort of tragedy of getting into a fight with the neighboring pride and losing one of the cubs, they were all so close. They literally, prides will spread out. They will they're not all, they don't always spend time completely together. But in the 2 days after this happened, they did not leave each other's side. So these images sort of were taken in those couple of days. And I think again speaks to this moment in time for that pride. So I think, yeah, thinking about storytelling, it goes beyond just storytelling within an image. It's how you present your work as well and the stories you give alongside. Um, so I wanted to talk a little bit about creating an impact in terms of conservation as well, and actually making a bit of a difference. The reason I've included this in the sort of storytelling part of the talk is that I think if you can tell a good story, then you can make a difference, because ultimately, how do you how do you get people on side when you're trying to drive an initiative or get people to care? Well, you get people to care by telling a story, whether that's with images or with words. Um, I think creating an impact as a wildlife photographer, before I sort of get into the some examples of I think where it's worked, um, I think it sort of goes without saying that yeah, we have to sort of be honest. Whether you're anyone who partakes in wildlife tourism is having some sort of impact on the destination they are going to. And I don't want to make that sort of a negative thing, because I think there's also a lot of positives. It brings money into local economy. It helps with conservation. But I mean, it's sort of common sense, but just trying to travel to places that are doing things in the right way is really important. So I wanted to sort of give you an example of somewhere that I think is doing wildlife tourism in a sort of sustainable and ethical way, and that is the conservancies around Mara North. The the reserve itself it can be a bit chaotic and extremely busy, to be quite blunt. And they are introducing, they are sort of getting better about setting up. When a cheetah or a leopard has cubs, they're getting better about setting up um, boundaries, not physical boundaries, but they put no-go zones essentially to stop tourists going into those areas and disturbing the cubs. Because in those first month or two, young cubs are extremely fragile. So there are things that they are doing right in there. This isn't sort of to say that everything in there is incorrect, but the conservancies around the National Reserve are they've come up with sort of a fantastic way of doing things. So basically the lodges will rent the land from the Maasai, which benefits the Maasai because they receive an income. They have a reason to protect and care for the wildlife there. And importantly, what that means also is that these organizations that rent the land, the lodges, the conservancy, are able to come up with their own ways of managing that land. So um, there are very limited numbers of cars that are able to go into these areas. They tend to have limits on the number of vehicles that can be on a sighting at one time, which tends to be 5 vehicles, which will or really sort of minimizes the impact on the wildlife. So this is a system that works for everyone. It works for the Maasai because they receive income. It works for tourists because you have fewer vehicles and fewer people when you're viewing wildlife, which is a much nicer experience. And most importantly, it also benefits the wildlife because it's less disturbed. There's an organization called the Mara Predator Conservation Program, who who did studies about cheetahs raising cubs, and actually found that within the national reserve, cheetahs raise fewer cubs to adulthood than outside. And there's lots of reasons that could be. There's a very high iron density, but really, I think, if being honest, it's a lot of it is the impact of tourism as well. Cheetahs are the bottom of the rung in terms of predators, and will be pushed off a kill by hyenas, by lions, by leopard, and so we're very easily spooked. And if there is lots of vehicles there, it can make them very nervous, and it even sort of alerts. Hyenas see a load of vehicles, they know something's going on. They're not stupid. So yeah, I think the conservancies are as an example of somewhere that is really doing things in a sustainable way, and I think that's important to look out for when visiting places. I wanted to give you one example. I when I read about this, I it sort of I think it backed up the idea that photography and filmmaking can make a real difference. So the Jamaican iguana, which was thought to be extinct, and is now it's discovered still be alive, but is critically endangered. And basically, the Jamaican government came to an agreement with a Chinese company to build a transshipment hub in an area that this critically endangered species lives. Excuse me. And I just want to read the sort of second part of this. Just when all hope seemed lost, the iguana got a new chance at survival after an outcry from the local community and many others vested in protecting the biodiversity of Goat Islands. The Jamaican government announced they would not build the port in the ecologically sensitive area. And in 2017, Goat Islands was officially declared a wildlife sanctuary. Now, there's no mention here of photography. There's no mention here of videos or filmmaking. But how do you get these stories across? How do you get it in the media? Um, how do you sort of get people to care and listen? You do that by storytelling, which requires images and videos. So I just thought that was sort of quite a good example of where something got overturned. And I'm sure that photos and videos were a part. If you look at wildlife photographer of the year, for example, the so many incredible images, absolutely stunning, beautiful images. But to me, the part of that competition that is the most interesting is the photojournalist award. It's the photography to me is sort of like what you. I think the most satisfying part of photography, or where it can make a difference, is what you do with those photos. It's not simply taking a nice photograph. It's what do you actually do with that afterwards that's going to make a difference, or help show some insight into something. It's the classic sort of, I know it's a cliche, but a picture paints 1,000 words. I do believe is very true. And I remember, this is sort of anecdotally, but I remember during my exhibition in 2013, and a couple came in, and the father had their daughter on his shoulders, and she was probably about, I don't know, 4 years old or something. And they'd been in the day before, and they had one of the brochures from the exhibition, and it had this image on the front, and they just said, our daughter will not stop looking at this photo. She keeps touching it. She was basically just, and I think that anecdotally is a perfect example of how people can be drawn in to care about something simply by visuals. Think about David Attenborough documentaries. They sort of help. They really help promote that, promote caring about nature, basically, which I think should be highly valued. So before we get back to a few more sort of a few photography tips, I wanted to talk a bit about a couple of charities that I sort of have met while I've been out in Mara. So the Mara Predator Conservation Program was set up by this man Niels. He went out there, I think it was to do a master's, and basically just never left. Set up this charity monitoring its lions and cheetahs within the Mara ecosystem. and they're doing some amazing work. They've set up systems for alerting cattle herders so that they know when lions are in the area, so they can be extra vigilant. They do a lot of work educating the local community, and recently collared a cheetah. Um, there's enormous problem in the Mara ecosystem with the numbers of cheetah. There are 27 adult cheetahs that are resident in the area. And when you think about how vast the Masai Mara is, it's really quite staggering that there are only 27. And there's a real sort of I'd say it's almost a confusion or just a lack of knowledge about why there are so few. So there's very few cubs, and there's very few that make it to adulthood. And even when they make it to adulthood, the a lot of them are sort of ending up vanishing, and no one really knows where they're vanishing or why they're vanishing. So the work that they're doing, I mean, he was so excited to get this collar on a cheetah. They haven't had a cheetah collared for a long time. And I made this short video for them for social media, which I'll share with you now. It's only just over a minute, to give you a bit of an insight into what happened.
So we have been looking for this single male cheetah for.
Can everyone hear the audio on that? Yeah, good, perfect.
So we have been looking for this single male cheetah for quite a while now. He's very elusive. Today is our lucky day. I'm now on my way to see the cheetah, and I've let the kindergarten service vet know as well. And hopefully, we are in a good position to guard the cheetah and put the collar on. So our latest estimate on the cheetah population gave us 28 resident adults. It's quite concerning, and that's why we now wanted to see if we can put collars on. This male used to be in a collision of 3. So we had 2 brothers, but both of them have disappeared, and we suspect that they've been killed in human-wildlife conflict. So we want to deploy a collar on the remaining male to see if we can offer protection in real time. So far, so good. Very happy. He's a very critical stage now. He's very groggy for the drugs. Yeah, so he's very vulnerable. So it's really important that you stick with him as long as you can. Huge success. I'm thrilled, happy, and I'm definitely going to have a drink tonight.
So that's just a very sort of a very short video about what happened during the day, essentially. So yeah, the idea is that by collaring the one remaining of the 3 brothers, that hopefully it will be perhaps a deterrent were it to come into human wildlife conflict, because they'll be able to see exactly where the cheetahs died. But also just knowledge about where they're going, where they're coming into contact with humans. Just to sort of expand on that knowledge, basically. Yeah, I think for me, wildlife photography and a sort of decision I took for myself is that I want the images I take to be worth something. I want to do something with the images, and this is one way that I've sort of decided I can try and help charities is by so I went and made this video for them. It's a couple of days of my time, but it gives them a very tangible something that they can help, show what they are up to. It's a very small thing, but it's something. And I think that's really important in wildlife photography, is just doing as whatever you can, essentially.
So we have been.
So the other charity that I wanted to mention was the Mara Elephant Project. I went and met them when I was out there end of last year. Again, just to sort of go and find out what they're up to and see if there was any way in which I could help them out. Do they, make a video for them, images? And one of the things they said was, we haven't got enough photos of elephants, which I sort of found completely baffling, that as an elephant charity, they just didn't have enough elephant photos. So it's on my to-do list is to send them a batch of elephant images so that they've got some more stuff to use. So I think just sort of yeah, being up for contributing in any way you can is really important. Is the Mara Elephant Project are an amazing organization. I went to their sort of headquarters out there, and they are so innovative and forward thinking in what they are doing. They've got sort of a like a call out system, like a 999 for elephant issues, where if anyone has issues with elephants coming into the village, they can get in touch. The Mara Elephant Project have a network of responders who will go out and respond to these issues. They help drive elephants away using drones, but that's a way of dealing with it. But they're not sort of stopping there. They were telling me about a sort of experiment they were doing, where essentially they had like a chessboard of crops, of lots of different crops, where they knew elephants would come in, and they did this to sort of find out which of those crops the elephants were going to eat, which ones they were after. And then knowing which ones the elephants were interested in, it turns out that by planting a like a barrier, so you plant the crop that the elephants don't want around the crop that they do want, and that is enough to stop elephants from going and raiding the other crops. So it's amazing sort of the ways that they're trying to find to deal with these issues of human wildlife conflict. They've got quite a lot of the big tuskers. They've got them tagged as well, so they know where they are. And saw some amazing data of you can sort of track the elephants' movements, and you can see that during the day they'll disappear off, they'll go into the forests, and the moment it's dark, they'll come out and they'll go into the villages and raid the crops. So you can sort of see this behavior very very precisely, which is quite interesting. So back to a few photography tips. Moments, behaviors, and interactions. So I think this image was called Kindred Spirit, and it's one of the lionesses playing with two cubs on top of a termite mound in Mara North. And I think capturing, yeah, when I think about what a moment is sort of a brief period in time that cannot be instantly repeated. And I think that is really important, the idea that what you're seeing cannot be instantly repeated, because when the viewer looks at the image, they feel like they're genuinely witnessing a moment in time. It has a lot more story to it when there is something actually happening, something going on. And I think it also just speaks to patience. People look at an image and they know that it wasn't just a turn up, click, off you go. That you've taken time to actually to wait for something to happen, and it gives you a bit of an insight into that subject. There's a shot of a cheetah again in Mara North Conservancy, and this is one of two brothers. Unfortunately, classic story as we've just sort of heard, but the other brother disappeared, and this cheetah's now by himself. But they'll go up trees to scent mark, and to see if there is any other cheetahs of scent mark there as well. So this was a cheetah that had gone up to the top of the tree, scent marked at the top, and then he was just heading back down. This series of 4 images is a lion called, which one was this? This was Siningo, also known as No Tail, one of 4 male lions that lead the Sarian Pride in Mara North Conservancy. And this was a series I took all on one evening of these 2 lions that were mating. But it also speaks, thinking about that story element, it speaks to a moment in time for the Pride where they had 3, was it 3? Yeah, they had 3 young cubs in the Pride, but 3 of the 4 males that lead the Pride were all mating with a number of the females in the Pride over like this sort of 2-week period, essentially. And so this is sort of, I like the idea that this is capturing this window of time for the Pride, when hopefully, I'm going back in mid-February, again, and hopefully there'll be some young cubs that might have just arrived. But this sort of speaks to the future of the Pride, and also about the fact that at this time they were all mating, which lions will often do because it's much easier for a Pride to raise cubs when there are more, rather than just being an individual mother with the cubs. It's much easier to have the support of the Pride with lots of cubs. So just going to sort of share a few more images that really all stem from moments and behaviors and interactions. This image here was, as you can see, it's a lioness moving one of her cubs. Absolutely incredible thing to witness. It was amazing. She had 4 cubs, and one by one she moved all of them right in front of us. It was absolutely amazing. But the reason that she was moving them was that it was actually, so this was the same Pride, and these 3 cubs might look small, but in comparison to these cubs, they are actually very large. And one problem you have when you have cubs that are slightly different ages is these cubs don't know how strong they are, and they'll start trying to play with these 10-day-old cubs, and it's not uncommon for them to accidentally kill their cousins, kill the other cubs. So this is why she was moving them. The other 3 cubs were becoming a bit boisterous, and she'd had enough and basically decided to move them somewhere else. There's just a few more images that sort of speak to capturing moments. Moments don't have to be the most incredible, unique thing that anyone has ever witnessed as well. Behaviors and moments can be something very simple. It's just something to make your image not just a photo of an animal. That's all that's sort of meant by trying to capture these interactions and moments. So the offbeat Pride, who were watching, one of the other lionesses had spotted some warthog and went off on a slightly half-hearted hunt. So that the rest of the Pride were all watching on, see if they were going to get a free meal. So, so last thing I'm going to sort of talk about before we have a quick break, and then show you the film, is light, which, as I mentioned at the start, is the second of the 3 things that I think are enough to make an image stand out. Behaviors and interactions we've already talked about. That alone is enough to make an image work. Light, again, is something that is enough by itself to make an image stand out, to grab the viewer's attention. I'm sure you've all heard this a million times, but golden hour is as good as it gets. As a photographer, those sort of that first hour of the day and last hour of the day, and actually the first hour is good, but the first 10-15 minutes, that is when you just get the most incredible warm golden glow, and it's an amazing time of day to photograph. No matter what you're photographing, whether it's wildlife, whether it's travel, whether it's portrait, it's just a fantastic time of day to be photographing. I love backlight at that time of the day as well. I think it can create very sort of warm, atmospheric images like this one here. When you are photographing at sort of this time of day and you're dealing with backlight, one thing to think about is, I think it's all about the shapes. You're not photographing the detail of your subject. You are literally looking for shapes when you have backlight, and paying attention to So every last bit of the shape of that subject, I think, makes an enormous difference to an image. So like this image on the left here, making sure that all four legs, it's timing it so you've got that rather than two legs that are sort of one behind each other, makes a big difference to these sorts of shots. Another sort of light that I absolutely love is side light, particularly again sort of towards the start and towards the start of the day and towards the end of the day. Side light is just beautiful. It's fantastic, and the reason it works is because it gives your subject shape. It gives it depth. As you can see in this image here, you've got one side of the face that is lit and the other side that is in shadow, and it's that sort of contrast, it's that shape, that's what sort of makes the sort of makes it work. And I think what makes that sort of light particularly good for photography. So yeah, I think when you're photographing, try and be aware of the light. It's not all about the subject. Sometimes it is about that behavior, about the interaction. You might have a very flat, overcast day with no light. That doesn't mean there's no photography to be done. But yeah, paying attention to the light as well as your subject is really important, and experiment with it. Try putting yourself in different positions where you have front light, side light, back light, and you get really different results. And when you are working with light, don't be afraid to let the shadows, like in this image, go really dark, because I think that sort of makes an image really work. So again, it's not sunlight, but it's still side light. I think it was on the edge of a sort of foresty area, so the light was very much coming from one direction. So, and again, sort of backlight, so it's all about the shape that your animal is creating. Here, timing it with the trunk coming up, much more interesting than if the trunk was just dangling down. And here, it's all about the light. That is what, if you take the light away from this, it's just a close-up shot of a leopard. The light is what makes it interesting. So that is we've come to the end of the first part. What time is it now? Has anyone got any questions?
There is one question there, actually. Carol, would you like to unmute yourself and put it in person?
Yeah, I'm really loving all these photos. Very curious, actually. How do you choose or decide which should be black and white or which should be color? I like color myself.
Yeah, it's often it comes down to I think color works when the color adds to the image. So when you are dealing with images like this, where you have a nice warmth to the scene, the color is actually sort of adding to the image. That's when I tend to leave it in color. Where I sort of tend to put it in black and white is where the color isn't really adding to the image, and I think it can almost become distracting. So when there's some portraits in the next half of the talk that are in black and white, and yeah, I think often it's one of two things. Either it's because the color just really isn't adding anything, or the light was not particularly interesting, and so actually putting it in black and white help. And the other is just when you get images that have blacks and whites. So again, in the second half, I've got just a couple of slides on black and white, and where you've got blacks and you've got whites and you've got really strong shapes, those are the images that I think work in black and white. But it is not it's not a clear-cut thing. I don't think there is a sort of way necessarily to decide sometimes whether an image is better in black or white on color. It can just be personal preference. And often I will do both a color and a black and white edit of an image. And half the time I then can't decide which I prefer. So it can be quite difficult to decide. Often I will try an image in both and just one sort of works slightly better.
And sometimes maybe it's about how you want to use it.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a series. I'll show you some images in the second half, some portraits. And I was specifically trying to put together 4 black and white portraits of lions. So
Right.
I put them in black and white, but actually in reality, a couple of them did look very nice in color, but I was trying to produce a black and white series of images.
Yeah.
So, right, it's about how you're using them or what your purpose for taking them is or what your aim is. But yeah, I mean, I think just experiment with it, try images in black and white and color and see which you prefer.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Carol. Dan's put a question in too. Dan, are you in a position to unmute and to ask the question yourself?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm just curious. You talk a lot about being in locations for a month. Can you take us through like what the whole process is from like being out in the field for the month to capturing your photos to then kind of deciding on what you actually use in the end?
So the being out there for a month. So basically, the way I've managed to get myself out there for a month is by working with a lodge out in Mara North Conservancy called Alex Walker Sarian. So they basically hire me to go over there, and if they have guests, well, they have guests there the whole time. But if they happen to have guests who are interested in photography, then I will help them with their camera, and I will take them out for a drive and sort of basically teach them photography. But while I'm doing that, that's probably a third of the time I'm there. So I then have an enormous amount of time while I'm there to work on my own stuff as well, basically. So that's how I've managed to get over there by being their photographer in residence. In terms of sort of the process of deciding what to use, I think whenever I go over there, I try and before I go, I try and come up with an aim. So try and come up with almost like mini projects, if you want. And the first time I went over, I specifically was shooting for an exhibition. I wanted to come back and have an exhibition, which I had in summer of 2003. So that was sort of the aim for the first time I went over there, was to put together an exhibition and also create a film, which I'm about to show you. And yeah, I mean, it's sort of sometimes it evolves while I'm there as well, though. So image I'll show you again in the second half, these 4 images of a black and white portrait of each of the 4 Sarian Pride males. That was like its own little mini project while I was there. So some of it is planning in advance about what I might try and actually capture while I'm out there. But some of it is also sort of while I'm over there, just responding to what I come across, essentially. Does that sort of answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so yeah, so I thought we'd start this the second half of the talk by showing you a film called Caribbean Yumbani. So first time I went over to Mara North, the aim for that month was firstly to put together a set of images for an exhibition, but also to create a film. And after talking to one of the guides called George Asono, I was just really sort of taken by his love of his home, which was Masai Mara, and how much he cared, like the genuine passion and care that all of these guides have for wildlife. So that was what I sort of tried to put across in this film. So it's 11 minutes. Hopefully you've got a tea or coffee. And yeah, I shall show this to you now.
That's good.
Karibu nyumbani. Welcome to my home. Eneo lipendalo la mbuga la Masai Mara. My beloved Masai Mara. Home is Mara North Conservancy, the largest conservancy in the Masai Mara, and Africa at its most majestic. Each morning the sky ignites, bathing the first plains in a blanket of boundless possibility, expectation, anticipation, nature's raw necessity. This world awakes to the soothing soundtrack of the Mara River. Its water, the lifeblood of the Mara ecosystem, slips and slopes over rocks that morph into hippos. Here in Mara North, we are blessed to share our lands with nature's most remarkable wildlife. Witnessing the abundance of life in Mara North, it is easy to think our wildlife is invincible, but that is far from the truth. past 20 years, Africa has lost more than 50% of its lion, cheetah, and wild dog populations. Each one of the nearly 100 species of mammals and 600 species of birds command our respect. As herds of wildebeest shift, predators follow. And as the rain falls, dry lagers turn into life-giving watering holes. This is the powerful marsh pride, one of the most successful pride in the Mara region. While they are ruthless to their competition, we witness a different side of them with each other. They are immensely caring, adventurous, and playful. So daybreak may be certain, and the dark which envelops the landscape is sure to follow. Each day's act is unique. Referees develop, bonds form, and life falls right in front of your eyes. In those moments, watching nature unfold, it feels like nowhere else on earth matters. Na hivyo ndivyo nahisi kwamba wanyama wanapaswa kuchungwa kikamilifu.
There we go. So, oops. So yeah, so that's Caribbean Yabani. It was a shortened 2-minute version of that won Travel Photographer of the Year's video category last year. So hopefully you enjoyed that. It's very much about just sort of almost like trying to lull people into appreciating wildlife, would be sort of my way of describing it. George was yeah, fantastic to work with. I think he did a great job of the voiceover as well. He very much had a sort of contributing element as well, because when I first sort of wrote the script, some of it didn't sound completely natural when he was saying it. So we changed a few things, and he then it was his idea to then actually put in some of the words in Swahili, and the closing statement was his. I said, give me a sentence like that finishes it. What do you want to say? And that was when he came up with the final sentence of I strongly feel that animals need to be protected. So yeah, so that's Caribbean Yambani. So back to sort of the last part of the talk is really a series of sort of photography tips, essentially, and ideas. So I mentioned at the start, there's sort of these three, I like to sort of think of them as like the three pillars of photography. Any one of these three things can make a photo work. We've done the behaviors and the interactions. We've talked about light, and the final one of the three is compositions, which is sort of that idea of and the idea of sort of bringing in the landscape, which I heard some of you talking about in the break as well. That sort of that sense of place, because ultimately, I think when you start to think about an animal in its environment, you are creating something much more unique. You know, it's very unlikely that I don't know, this leopard. What was the leopard called? I can't remember. But I'm sure this female leopard does occasionally use the same trees, but very unlikely to sort of find it in exactly the same spot. So I think that idea of bringing in the landscape is really important. And I'd sort of say that the number one thing to think of in terms of compositions, and I think this goes for any type of photography, is just simplicity. Clean, simple compositions. Let your subject sort of do the talking. Let the light do the talking. If something isn't adding to an image, generally it's best to not have it in the photograph. Is sort of my general opinion. So again, here, like, what really makes this photo work, I think, is those 1, 2, 3 trees sort of dotted in the background. It's the bringing in of the landscape that sort of makes it into a more unique image. If you take all that out, it's just an elephant walking. So yeah, trying to include the subject in its environment, I think, is one thing you can do with compositions. The other is zoom in close. Try close-up images. In general, I think the best photographs are one of two things. They are either an animal within an environment, or they are close-ups or parts of a subject. Very rarely are the best images just, you know, sort of framed up where your subject just fits within the frame, the whole of your subject. I think that's very rarely the best composition, or very sort of, yeah, a bit less interesting. I think generally the close-up snippets or including the landscape tend to work best. And when you start really looking at the details, you can open up sort of like all sorts of different compositions. It's great fun just trying to fill the frame with your subject. I think that works really well. thought I'd do a sort of quick section on portraiture as well, portraits of animals. So this series here is the ones I mentioned earlier. So these are the 4 Enkiani boys, who are the 4 male lions in Mara North that lead the set. They're in control of the Sarian Pride. You got Lengwe on the left. Then you've got the second one is Nkongu. Nkongu? Yeah, Shonko or Nkongu. Who this image to me is, I think, one of my favorite images that I've taken, because it completed the set, which was like, this was one of my sort of mini projects while I was out there. I really want to capture close up black and white image of all 4 of these male lions. And the second one in had been injured in a fight with 2 neighboring males, and like he was on death's door. Like it was very, very touch and go as to whether he was even going to survive. The vets did treat his wounds, but he essentially remained pretty much motionless for the best part of 10 days. He was in one place for practically a week. Unbelievably thin, weak, and then I think got quite fortunate in a way, because the Pride managed to kill a hippo and it wasn't far away from where they were, and I didn't see him move, but he moved the few hundred meters. Couldn't actually get to the hippo because it was down in a lugger, and he was so weak and his back leg was injured and broken, he couldn't really walk. But I actually saw one of the lionesses break off some meat from the hippo and take it to him, which was just the most incredible thing to see. So I think he was quite fortunate that happened close to where he was, and that image was taken on. This was the first time I saw him sort of moving and walking again, and it was just this amazing moment of sort of resilience that he was showing to have come through the injuries, and it also sort of completed the set. So that's one of my favorite images that I've taken. And then third one, Sningo, and on the far right is Moana, who hasn't got the best mane, but he is the dominant one of the 4. So when it comes to portraits, it's really about waiting for that look. There is always just like a switch that flicks, and many times I have photographed lions walking towards my vehicle, and their head is sort of droopy and they're not paying any attention, and they just sort of walk on past, and you don't get the shot. You might get a portrait, you might get a shot of the face, but there's no life behind the eyes. There's no sort of excitement. And I think portraits are all about just waiting for that moment, waiting for, in this instance, this is a lion called Halftail. And I can't even remember what it was. Something caught his eye in the distance, and his head's sort of up. You can see he's alert. There's sort of feeling behind the eyes. And that's completely different to when, it's exactly the same as photographing people. If you're switched off, there's nothing behind the eyes, you haven't really got a particularly great shot. You're waiting for that moment that there's sort of the eyes light up. Elephant called Edwin. Just a couple of points on black and white, which we did sort of discuss a little bit from the question at the end of the first half. Black and white, to me, needs black and white. It sounds sort of very obvious, but you need your darks and you need your lights. That is what you haven't got light, or you haven't got color, sorry, to give your image the shape and the structure. So you're solely relying on lights and darks. And I think the best images tend to be dark subjects on light backgrounds. And like with the edit here, sort of emphasizing that a bit more. So selecting the background, decrease the contrast a bit, probably brightened it a little bit just to emphasize, to really make those darks stand out against the lights. And again, here with these flamingos, it's lights on darks. So that's sort of the other way that it works really well. And to a certain extent, you can do that obviously while you're shooting, but I think in the edit as well, just sort of emphasizing that, making sure you've got the lights on dark or dark on light. And it's great fun to play around with. I love playing around with black and whites. If you do black and white conversions, make sure you're not just sort of desaturating the photograph. Use those color channels. Here, for example, the sky had a nice sort of blue color to it, but converting it into black and white by dragging the blue slider to the left, that sort of darkens the blues. So you can use those to help give your image that sort of the lights and the darks and the shape. Obviously, yeah, I sort of touched on this before as well, but just I think the importance of having a project. It doesn't matter how small that project is. The project can just literally be, I have a space on my wall and I want to try and take a shot that will fit it. Or it can be, the first time I went out was an exhibition. The second time I went out, it was this set of images. And I think it just helps give you a bit of direction as well, helps with creative direction. And it also helps just in terms of being proactive, genuinely thinking quite in depth about your photography. What are you trying to do? And I think asking yourself the question, what would your perfect photograph look like, is a really good question to ask yourself, because you can then put yourself in a position to take the sorts of images that you want to take, not just sort of take the images that happen to appear. And yeah, I think one of the things for me is I like really clean, simple images, love black and white, darks on lights. So I look for that sort of thing. But I also like to be able to get down low. So when I'm out in the Mara, this is the vehicle at the lodge that I use. And yeah, that's sort of a really important part of being able to capture the images I get. If I know I want to achieve low angle images, therefore I keep going back to this place because I'm able to do it with the vehicles. So sort of being very consciously deciding how to go about your photography. And the last thing is just to try and develop a sort of consistent style. I think working out what you like and what you don't like and trying to take those images, and it means that when you go into a scene, you have a way to approach it. You're not sort of, you sort of can avoid that sort of scattergun approach, where yes, not everything is an image, but there are a million different photographs that could be taken. And the more you sort of work out what you like and what you want to achieve, I think helps then in any scene. So I love this sort of light. So whether I'm photographing puffins or lions, I still go in search of this sort of light and underexpose and try and get those sort of darks into the image as well. And black and white. So these were all shot in Costa Rica. But broadly, it's a very similar sort of approach or style to the images that I've taken of African wildlife. Those two on the left, you've got the lights on a dark background, and some of those others, it's sort of darks on light, if that makes sense. So yeah, just try and sort of decide what you like, and sort of stick with that. I think that's a really good way to go about photography. So that's sort of comes to the end of all the everything I wanted to say. I'll take some questions in a moment as well if anyone has any questions. But just to say, please do feel free to come and follow on Instagram, or sign up to my mailing list on my website. I run wildlife workshops in here in London, in Richmond Park, and also run photography holidays. And when I'm going out to Kenya in February, I'm making an online wildlife photography course and an editing course too. So if you're interested in wildlife photography and editing in Lightroom as well, please do sign up to my mailing list on my website, and I'll put something out once I've finally completed that. yeah, hopefully there's some tips in there for everyone. And some, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. Carol's come up again with exactly the question that I had in mind, actually, which is, you said nothing about gear. I
Yeah.
don't mind what brand it is, but
Yeah.
can you tell us something about your go-to lens and
Yeah.
those sorts of things, please?
So I use Nikon. I shoot with two Nikon Z8s. Um, and then in terms in terms of lenses, I tend to have a 180 to 600, which is f5.6 to 6.3, a 70 to 200 2.8, and a 24 to 70 2.8 for friendly elephants, basically. My lens of choice would always be a 70 to 200 2.8 if I can get close enough. And the reason for that is that I think you get a slightly different feel to an image when you are closer. So when you're using the sort of 600 mil, that sort of thing, 600 mil, I think you feel it it doesn't matter for some images, but for others, you can feel that sort of distance. You don't get that intimate feel to the photograph that you get when you are shooting more like 70 to 200. You feel that, it's people won't necessarily know that they're feeling that, but you were closer to the subject when you took the image, and that comes across in the final image. So that's why the 70 to 200 2.8 would be my favorite lens if I could get close enough to a subject, which isn't always possible. The reason I use a 180 to 600 is, for me, the composition is really important. And bring in the landscape, like say that shot of the elephant with the three trees behind. Like, it's really important that where everything is. And I have tried using a 400 mil prime before, and I just got frustrated. It's a lot of the argue in the past, you could argue that they used to, the focus was incredible, but nowadays, my 180 to 600 is unbelievably fast on the Z8. There's no issues with focus speed, which is one of the reasons people like primes. You obviously, with primes, you're able to get a lower aperture than say the 5.6 to 6.3 on the 180 to 600, but by the time you're that zoomed in, you've got quite a shallow depth of field anyway. So yeah, I've just found that using a prime is a bit restrictive. Although occasionally I see images with like a 400 2.8, and I'm very, very jealous because they have a creamy background, and yeah, so but that's sort of my setup basically. And two bodies, so I'm not always changing.
Yeah. Jane's got a personal question for you, so we'll leave that till the very end.
Okay.
But are there any other questions out there that people want to come back with? There are a couple of people saying stunning still images, great video. Thank you. Thank you for a really interesting talk. Video and photographs are wonderful. All those nice things that you want to hear and that we want to say to you. But I guess there might be some more questions out there, or some more general comments. Elizabeth.
Hi Matthew, thank you. That was really good. I live in Richmond, so what do you photograph apart from deer in Richmond Park?
Richmond Park, you've obviously got the deer, you've got the parakeets, although you can find them all over the place. Little owls, that's my sort of it's always a successful outing if I manage to find a little owl. And then there's just lots of sort of bird life down by Pen Ponds as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, I mean, one possibility would be to have a travel group meet up in Richmond Park.
It's a brilliant idea.
And if Duncan wanted the nature group to be involved, that's never a problem. And similarly, London region. We could do something that we set up with you, Matthew, maybe.
Yeah. Sounds good. It's a great spot. I love it photographing there.
Yeah.
There's a tawny owl somewhere in Richmond Park. Do you know where it is, Matthew?
I saw a tawny owl there last year. No, was it last year? No, it would have been 2013.
In a tree.
2023. I saw a tawny. I saw a pair of nesting tawny owls
Yeah.
there. I haven't seen any since 2023.
Right.
So I don't know where they are at the moment, I'm afraid.
Okay. Thank you.
Have you tried going out and looking for them?
I've not yet. I've only just started being interested in wildlife photography and birds, but I've heard that there is a tawny owl in the middle of the park somewhere that's in a tree.
Okay. No, I don't know where that is. Might have to
Well,
do
if
a
I
bit of
find it,
hunt.
I'll let you know.
Yeah, please do. Let's go on a bit of a hunt for it. I think the best thing you could do would be to listen for it.
Well, I thought of using the Merlin app.
Yeah, Merlin's great for that.
Yeah.
And what I don't know about at the moment, but certainly sort of springtime, if they've got any chicks, you might hear the sort of really high pitched.
Oh.
I'm not going to try and impersonate it now. But listen on the Merlin app.
Yeah.
Listen out for, because it's a very distinctive, very high pitched sort of squeal type. So yeah.
I'll do some detective work.
I'm going to draw things to a close and say, Matthew, thank you from all of us. And thank you for the coming and going in the conversation as well. And just to remind people, if you're not a member of the travel group, we do try to put stuff on the RPS website travel section. So, you know, if you're interested at all in coming to our October weekend or in any of our workshops or holidays, they are not necessarily just for travel group people, and you are welcome to look and see if they're appropriate for you. And if ever you feel, whether you're a member of the travel group or not, that you have something that you would like to present to us in one of these Sunday afternoon Zoom sessions once a month or so, we'd love to hear from you. So do please come back to us on that. Thanks again. Thanks everybody for your contributions.